Good morning and welcome to the podcast. I'm Zach Newman. I'm here with my friends Daniel Queering.
How's it going?
Tanner Seacrest.
Hello.
It's the podcast in the woods. We're being joined today by a couple of very special guests. Why don't you guys introduce yourselves? Molly, who are you?
Hi, I'm Molly, and I'm a student at Faber. I'm studying theater and psychology, and I'm from Hillsborough.
All right, and Laurel, who are you?
I'm Laurel Koerner. I'm the theater professor here and director of the theater program here at Faber College. I'm an actor and director. Yeah.
All right. Today we're doing something a little different. We're talking about a play instead of a movie. This is a play that Faber put on in the spring semester and then again this fall. So the play is called A Doll's House. It's by Henrik Ibsen. So tell us about the play. What's it about? Why did you decide to put it on?
Well, largely we landed on this show because of the casting pool we had at the time. So it had a lot to do with the actors we had available to us and knowing what Molly in particular as a theater major should get the experience to tackle in a role like Nora. So I believe it was like Christmas time and I called you and said, hey, we're thinking about doing this show.
I think I almost cried.
Yeah, because we wouldn't be able to do it had she not. I mean, I would not want to direct the show without an actor that had 4 years of solid training and was, prepared for the kind of heavy lifting of a role like that. So we had the right person for Nora in Molly as an actor.
So were you both familiar with the show beforehand?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So could you, I'm actually really interested in, so what do you mean by like heavy lifting with this role of Nora? Because there's bound to be some, I'm guessing you're alluding to some complexities with the character and things like that.
Definitely. So Nora is on stage for most of the show and travels an emotional journey that is, on the surface it looks like a 180, but what you sort of know over time is that it's something that's been simmering for a while with just some remarks she makes. But we watch that volcano erupt in this show. It's a really emotionally vulnerable role to play and can be done badly so easily.
Can you give us like a brief synopsis of what the play's about so we have some context for that character?
Yeah. So A Doll's House covers 3 days in the Helmer household, which is Nora, her husband Torvald. They have 3 children, whom we see very little of, a nanny, a maid. So it's everything takes place in their apartment in Norway at the very end of the 1800s. We bumped it up a little to the beginning of the 1900s so that we could use electric light. So what we see is a kind of Nora's finally putting to words and finally fully recognizing the system in which she lives. Seeing the way that other people see her isn't necessarily new. Again, we see rumblings of that. Her irritation with being referred to as a little girl or immature or not responsible. So finally, she comes to a realization about her place in things and the injustice of her place in things, that she's not inherently childish. She's not inherently, not knowledgeable about economics. It's a system that has kept her in a state of ignorance. And that's what she finally is able to see and put a finger on. And takes action in kind of a revolt against that.
I think that's one of the things that's really kind of jarring about the whole play is because whenever you're brought into this household and this experience, you're kind of like, this seems all right, right? You know, I think Nora and Torvald seem to really love each other, but then as things kind of unravel, I think you're forced to really kind of think about what is wrong with this situation. Because, I mean, a lot of situations in life, you know, especially in households, you're like, oh, well, that obviously shouldn't be happening, right? But this one you have to unpack a little bit, and it kind of takes the viewer on kind of this subtle journey kind of with Nora. So I think I begin to see the complexities of Nora's character here, especially because you kind of realize with her what she's going through, right?
Yeah, I think that's one of the strengths of the writing of the play. That in the beginning, we all get to feel, you know, warm fuzzies about this loving household the day before Christmas, and we're all excited. And we hear this success story, right? He's worked so hard to earn this position, and he's getting a promotion. You know, it's a really nice set of circumstances we're brought into at the very beginning. And then as we see Nora with Torvald, and then Nora with somebody else, Nora with Torvald, and then Nora with somebody else, suddenly those things, you see the contrast between them. Nora with Torvald is one type of person, right? She performs a certain kind of identity for him, and once she transgresses that or does something that isn't to type, we see her get punished for that, right? So the play is structured in a way that, step by step and scene by scene takes us on that journey with her.
It's almost like she's playing a part in front of her husband.
Yeah, Molly, I wonder what that was like. Do I get to ask questions?
You can ask questions. Yeah, I was gonna say, like, what were the challenges of this character?
Well, for one, there was just the challenge of memorizing the lines, because, like Laurel was saying earlier, Nora's almost on stage the entire show, and it's not a short play, and just having the energy to be on stage that whole time and not just kind of zone out, that was really challenging. But I think also it was challenging to think about, to remember that, like, Nora was a real person, and there's a lot going on under the surface. She's not just an archetypal character. And so when the play starts, there's a lot of baggage that she's bringing in. And she very quickly reveals this secret that she's been hiding about borrowing the money. And I had to think about, like, what was that like for her? And there's all this baggage the moment that Krogstad enters, and how their relationship is. It's not like she's just meeting him for the first time. There's a lot of history there. So that's something that made it really challenging.
Yeah, a lot of energy, I imagine, went into that backstory, all that prior knowledge, that prior life that's lived. And then we watch, we're just watching this kind of peak moment of a whole bunch of stuff we don't see, but we learn about through exposition. That takes a lot of work to piece together your character's history in a genre like this. Otherwise, I don't think you can successfully play those given circumstances if you don't understand them.
Do you have, like, a kind of process that you use when you are trying to get into the head of a character like this, or sort of understand their backstory? How do you go about that?
For playing Nora, something that I did was journal a lot as Nora to kind of help me get inside of her head. With other characters, it's different. But that was something that was particularly helpful with Nora. And then I also went through the script, and I would mark every time somebody used a different name for her. So, like, Torvald has a lot of names for her, like Skylark and Doll, and those are clues that tell me more about Nora and how she acts around him and about their relationship. So just kind of really combing the script in depth to find clues like that.
Do you find ways that you identify with her character that you could relate to?
I would guess this is true for all people, but this idea of having to put on a different character for different people that you're around, and the way that you act differently and perform differently depending on maybe what you want from a person in a given moment, I think is relatable.
And towards the towards the end of the play, whenever things are starting to kind of unravel, it kind of takes this twist of where Nora is questioning kind of the traditions and conventional wisdom and kind of the religiosity and things of her culture. And so I think, I don't know, do you, 'cause I mean, I'm guessing, back then, Christian culture, right? Women have traditional roles, men have traditional roles. And I mean, a lot of the same thing around here, right? And so, I don't know, did you find any relationship between the questioning of the culture you grew up in with Nora's questioning of hers and things like that?
Yeah, I think I definitely did. I mean, especially, I guess, these last couple of years of being in college and not living at home and kind of, even though I'm still in Hillsborough, being away from, like, I guess the culture I grew up in and living with more people who come from a lot of different cultures and backgrounds has definitely made me think about that a lot more and made me question what is the right way to live in relationship with other people.
I think I can really relate to that and relate to the character as well, because I sort of, growing up and in high school, I also just sort of took what the culture around me for granted, sort of inherited those ideas and didn't really start to question those things until I came to college. And that was, I think, one of the reasons why the show was so impactful to me, especially the first time I saw it, because at the very end when Nora says all these things about, I think I have responsibility to myself first, stuff like that, I really identified with that as part of my experience of beginning to question these things and realizing that I don't agree with a lot of them and having to find my own way.
Yeah, I think that also can help take the conversation about the show beyond, is it just a play about women's rights, right? Is it just a play about marriage as an institution specifically? I think, Ibsen himself said I don't think of it as a feminist play. I don't have a feminist message to send, though I think he might have misunderstood or been using a different definition of the word than I do. But I think that's really the crux of it, that there are institutions that exist that persist out of tradition or out of ease, expediency, and that it takes a lot of work to dismantle a system. And they benefit the people at the top of the system who get to ensure that it persists and disadvantage others. And when you can look at it through that lens, then you can apply it to any number of things, right? Social strata that exist because of jobs, right? Or economic status, race, gender, even where you live, right? All of these things are systems that persist. And I think Ibsen is saying when the system starts to hurt the people it should be helping, then it's time to take a closer look and ask, is there another way?
And I think what's most interesting about Nora's kind of turnaround with that is that she doesn't say, the heck with this whole thing, I know it's wrong, or she doesn't reject it completely. She just comes pretty much from this completely agnostic standpoint, saying, I don't know what to think about any of this. Maybe all these things I've been told are true, but I got to find it out for myself. And so I think that was a very, by the writers, was a very, very interesting route to go. Especially if they're trying to critique something, you would think they would reject it outright rather than just stay in that neutral ground of questioning something, which I thought was really interesting.
I think that's what kind of makes the critique more powerful. Rather than explicitly saying this is bad and this is good, there's room for the audience to really ponder it.
And that there are maybe good applications and bad applications of a tradition, a system, an institution. That it's not, you can do it well and you can do it poorly. And there were, at least at the time of the writing of the play, and I think we can see it in other contexts too, there were poor applications of the institution of marriage that were born out of a sense of tradition.
Sort of on that vein, one of the questions that I had for you was, is Torvald sort of this really bad guy or a product of his culture? I was talking to our friend Derek Ham the other day, and he had gone to, after one of the shows you had a discussion, which I was not able to go to, but he said he went to that and there was a lot of people who were sort of advocating for Torvald. So how do you see that? Is he just this villain who sort of lives to exert his control over Nora, or is he sort of a product of his environment?
I want to say both.
Okay.
Yeah, he is sort of a product of his environment because this is the way he's taught that life works. I mean, this is how life has always worked. This is how marriage works. That's what he knows. But at the same time, people are capable of making choices and changing, and Torvald has kept within that institution and I guess chosen not to think about it, or I don't know, to keep things the way that they are.
Yeah, I think one of the issues with like a system or a tradition like this is not that people want to sort of keep them going in spite of the harm that they cause, but just because they're ignorant of it.
Mm-hmm.
Which is where I think works like this are important, because they bring you to that awareness.
And then it also raises the entire question of it was kind of what you touched on, was can you differentiate the system from the man Torvald, right? Is Torvald meant to be a complete reflection of the system itself, or is this a man who was born within a system within certain traditions and certain religious practices, and has in a way twisted them towards for his own selfish gain or things like that, or for his need to have control over something? Because I think I agree with Molly here that, Torvald is a bit of a villain, but I think he's also what the traditions he's been born into are bearing an effect, right? Because you can choose to use a certain set of rules to help yourself and to neglect the help of others, or you can use it for its intended purpose and try to benefit everyone around you with it as well.
Yeah, there's a great moment where Torvald says, perhaps it's time for learning. And Nora asks, who needs to learn, Torvald? And he says, you and the children. And I think that's a key moment where we see, what you're describing, Zach, not happening, right? It's the moment where he should say,
because
teach me, tell me, help me understand, what she does earlier, but after that, he still doesn't seem to recognize that there's something wrong with his own behavior and the way that he thinks of Nora and women in general. So until that recognition is there, Torvald, I think as a character, isn't capable of change.
But after she shows him, after she's shown him what she's gone through, sort of on his account, and he still is not accepting responsibility for it, then that's sort of his ultimate failure as a character. That's his weakest point. Yeah, I was looking at this last page of the script because he's trying to get her, not to leave, to sort of give him a second chance, and she's telling him about how he's basically a stranger to her, and he says, "Can I never be more than a stranger to you?" And she says the most wonderful thing would have to happen first. a miracle. And she says, you and I, we both have to change so much. So basically, by this point, he's sort of shown his hand of what his character is through the circumstances of the story that have brought that out. And she basically says, no, this is the way you are. And she says, I don't believe in miracles. You're never going to change, so you don't get another chance.
Yeah, I think there's a whole dimension to this too, to think about the ways in which the social structure forces Torvald to also perform, right? That we see Torvald as a man very concerned with appearances, and that comes up again and again, and Nora is part of that, right? That her existence as a beautifier to Torvald's world ties into that. So absolutely, we can look at the character of Torvald and say, he is the way he is because society also places high expectations on him for reputation and social status, income level, all these things that he also has to work very hard and desperately at to maintain.
That's very interesting because you see kind of the same motivations undergirding what Krogstad does, because his reputation is nothing, right? And he's trying to get his feet back under him by this job at the bank, so he's kind of keeping Nora under his thumb in order to do that, pursuing the same things in a sense as I think there's a line in the play where Krogstad envisions himself eventually taking Torvald's job.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so they're both going after the same thing. But what else I thought was interesting is that whole theme of how changeable are people, right, in who they are. Because you see, Nora and Torvald really just saying, we'd have to change a lot and we can't change and I don't believe in miracles and these sorts of things. But you kind of see a 180 with Krogstad. Because of some events that happened with him as well. And so I thought it was really interesting how those two kind of situations, those two relationships were contrasting each other the whole entire play.
Got anything there, Tanner?
Well, so speaking of Krogstad, because we haven't talked about him a lot, when he first comes out, he's dressed in all black, and the actor that played him was pretty big, so, is a good clue that he was going to be kind of more an antagonist. And when it starts out, you're kind of like, oh, he's kind of sinister, the way he's kind of just pacing around the room. But then later on, you basically found out this guy has nothing to lose. He just really holds this one piece of power over Nora. And he's really not that scary or even evil. So I don't know if that was kind of how you portrayed him on purpose, or if that's just the way that I interpreted it, or kind of how that was for you guys.
When we were rehearsing the scenes with Nora and Krogstad back in the spring, we played a lot with what it's like when animals are scared. And so when an animal is scared, it wants to attack. And that was kind of how Krogstad was. He is a little sinister and scary, but it's because he's scared and he's in a really vulnerable place. And I felt like Cody did such a good job of showing that. And once again, I don't think you could look at Krogstad and be like, he's the villain, because you see all these different sides of him.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely agree. I think that was one of the things I wrote down about the way Cody played Krogstad, is that he was a different kind of villain or a different kind of antagonist or whatever you want to call it, because he literally came across as a man at the end of his rope, right? And so it's almost like he was kind of looking as a third party on his actions, and he was like, well, I don't really like this, but it's what I got to do, right? If I want to provide for myself or for my family or restore my name or things like that. So I totally resonate with that. I thought that was another really powerful thing, and your guys' scenes together was one of my favorite parts of the play.
When he first shows up, he's almost, it makes me think of like he's a gangster, who you owe money to, and it's like, give me my money or I'm gonna break your kneecaps with a lead pipe. But as we get to know him, he becomes one of the more sympathetic characters. And one of the things that I really appreciate about this play that I think is different is he seems like the bad guy in the story, even though he may be sympathetic, because the whole conflict is Nora owes money to him and she can't let Torvald find out. But if Krogstad doesn't get what he wants, he's going to tell Torvald. And in the end, that entire situation resolves itself because Krogstad, through the events that happen in the story with him and Christine, he eventually says, you know what, never mind, we're good. You don't have to pay me that money. And so, if that was it, that's really kind of breaking an important rule of storytelling. That's just resolving itself without any action by your main characters doing anything to solve it. But it's because that is not the point. It's because those circumstances bring out the important things in the characters that we need to see. And after Torvald finds out, he reacts, we understand him, and then the situation is resolved, but it's too late. And so even though they could, conceivably continue living their lives the way that they always have, Nora's, I guess, done pretending. Mm-hmm. She says, I can't hide behind this. I can't have a facade anymore.
Yeah, Ibsen's writing is so rich, and there are, 6 layers of meaning to every phrase, just about. So, but a moment I like in particular was a wording choice, and it's when Christine says, Krogstad says, I'm shipwrecked, and Christine says, I am too, and if 2 people can cling to each other, can hang on to each other, then maybe it would be better for them. And I think that's critical word choice. 2 people. 2 humans equal to each other, caring about each other in a genuine and vulnerable way, which is not at all the picture we have of the way Torvald and Nora's marriage is maintained.
It's rather than 2 people clinging to each other, it's Torvald saying, well, I'll just carry you because you're too weak, you're too silly to do anything by yourself.
Yeah, there's an interesting dimension to this too that really emerged for me in our second iteration, the November production. That was the sort of white knight myth that Torvald subscribes to and Nora subscribes to, and then when it doesn't play out the way the myth said it ought to, right, where the knight comes to the rescue and saves Nora from harm, but Torvald thinks of himself that way, right? He thinks of himself as this hero, and yet when he's put in the situation where he could be heroic, he doesn't play his part. And so I think for Nora, it's kind of like, well, then why should I play mine? I'm not really the one who needed rescuing here. I saved you. I put my life on the line for this. I took drastic measures. And Torvald, is unwilling and unable to do that.
Yeah, he really very fundamentally views himself almost as her savior. Mm-hmm. To the point where near the end of this, after he gets the letter and they no longer have to pay back the money, is, I think, one of the just like most villainous monologues I've ever heard. And he says stuff like, I actually find your lack of insight and lack of understanding and lack of ability to know what to do rather attractive. It makes me realize that I am a man and you are a woman. And it feels so sweet. It feels so satisfying to forgive my wife. In a way, it's a little bit like you're my wife and you've also now become my child. And so that's his whole... The way that he looks at himself is, look at me. Look at this grand thing I've done for my helpless little wife. When really, all he's done is forgive her when there was no longer any stakes.
Yeah.
Like, when there was any danger of anything, he panics and said, "Look at what you've done to me. My reputation is ruined." And it's only after there's no danger to him that he says, "Well, I forgive you. Look at how magnanimous I am."
Well, and whenever he first finds out, he even starts speaking in the past tense. He says, "I loved you," before the debt is forgiven, and it's like there he showed his hand, right? That even though he kind of plays this part himself, I don't think his love for Nora was any more than surface deep.
Yeah, that's where everything gets like so real with Torvald, and then this letter comes and it's just back to playing again.
There was a line or two in that third section that I kind of got the like idea that like, oh, like Torvald is still stuck in the quote unquote honeymoon phase, you know, where like at the beginning of their marriage, like, oh, it's all fine and good, and like maybe like she married up in the class system or whatever, but then it's like as time goes on, like she's changing and like becoming more independent, and he's just kind of like, I'm still just the great guy that pulled you up to my level type of thing, and that he's not changing with her. But I couldn't find it in the script.
So, we'll just take your word for it.
Yeah, you'll have to take my word for it.
No, he has, I think, probably his flaw that everything else springs from is he just has no self-awareness whatsoever, because like I talked about all the way that he views himself, but he can't step back and see that that's a filter that he looks at himself through, not just the way things are. And so there's how can he ever hope to change if he refuses to acknowledge there's anything wrong with him?
Yeah, it's interesting to compare Torvald and Krogstad in that respect, and we've touched on this already, but that, you know, Torvald's like, I'm doing this and it's fine, and Krogstad is, I'm doing this and it's not fine, but I really need to because I'm desperate. And that's that self-awareness that then makes him capable of finally, I think, surrendering to a kind of a fate where he is equals with Christine, and she's the one doing the, you know, carrying the financial burden, and that's fine, even though their society is going to trumpet something else, that because of their genuine love and care for each other, it's going to be fine. But yeah, for Torvald, he lacks that self-awareness that then would be the instigator of eventual change.
How do you view the character of Christine? What kind of a person is she? Is that too vague?
Well, no, I think it's interesting to hear, well, you know, for an actor who's played a role, they have adopted a point of view that belongs to the character. Right? So the way Molly views Christine is going to be the way Nora views Christine.
To figure out in my head.
And that's the discipline, that's just the work, right? So
yeah,
it's important that Molly as the actor sustains that for the duration of our process. Right. But that's interesting, like, to consider. How does Nora view Christine versus how does Christine function as a plot device?
Right. Well, the reason I ask is because of this. Because Krogstad sort of, you know, has that revolution. He makes the right decision, but it's through Christine. She sort of comes out and saves him from this nosedive that he's in. And comparing that to Torvald and Nora, like, what was the difference? How is it that Krogstad can be saved and Torvald can't? And what is it about Christine that allows that to happen? That she's able to do that?
Well, I think one of the differences is just where Krogstad and Torvald are at in life. And like we said, Krogstad's at the end of his rope, and Torvald's like on top of this mountain with this new promotion, and everything's so good. So I think for one, that just makes a difference of they're in different places of readiness to change. Yeah.
I think too, like Christine has had a set of circumstances that have allowed her to and forced her to just really grow up, right? She was given agency in the world, in society, to work, earn money, take care of other people, and that's a kind of dignity that hasn't been afforded to Nora. So what you're talking about when we think about, Christine and Krogstad coming together and sort of rescuing each other is that actually Christine is capable of being that solid partner. But because of the way that Nora's been confined and not given agency or responsibility.
Yeah. And we know everybody views her as silly. Like Christine, who hasn't seen her for years, is like silly Nora, and everybody views her that way. So why would Torvald take her seriously?
Yeah. I think that's one of the great things about the character, is because she does kind of seem like a silly person when you first meet her. Like she talks a lot. She's like sort of this constant stream of talking. Even after she sees Christine, and she's like, all right, I'll sit here and I won't say a word. And then she talks for like 5 more minutes. And she says things like when she comes back and she has the Christmas presents for the children, and she pulls out this toy sword, and she's like showing him to Torvald, and she's like, it's a sword, don't panic, it's not real. And it's like, oh, we know. But then there's a profound depth of character under that that we see more and more come out, and that's what I think makes her a good character, is that complexity. She's not just one-dimensional, saying silly things all the time, but she's also not this heavy, profound, making philosophical statements about society. Yeah.
I think part of the reason for that is with all of the added stress on her as the play goes, it's harder and harder for her to perform. So then you get to see those complexities and things come out.
And also at the same time, when you have Christine and Krogstad and Torvald and Nora, they're two couples that are kind of on opposite sides of the societal expectation, right? Because the floor has already fallen out from beneath Krogstad, right? People don't think he's a great guy. And with Christine, I mean, she's not really reviled or anything like that, but she kind of runs counter to the grain of things. And so she works hard, she's self-sufficient, she loves working and being self-sufficient and those sorts of things. So I think that living against the grain of the culture that they're in maybe also contributes to their ability to change as well. Because kind of the worst, quote unquote, has already happened to them. And then they can only build outward from there.
Right. Yeah, one of the things that I was thinking of was, because one of the things that the story's about is Nora's growth as a character, and growth always comes in moments of tension like that or trauma. And so Christine has already gone through that at some point, or even gone through years of it, and so she's already had that growth, maybe in a different way, but she's had more of a chance to grow up. And then so we see her come in like that, and then we experience Nora going through a similar thing in front of us.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that word growth, and I was just wondering, like, does Nora really grow, or is it more of a just like realization, like a taking the mask off type thing?
I think it is that. And maybe now she's able to grow. Yeah. So, yeah, we don't necessarily see her grow as a character as much as have these realizations and make these decisions. And so now we know that she has the opportunity to, which has sort of been stunted by her circumstances her entire life.
So I have a question specifically for you, Molly.
Okay.
How did your role as Molly Faber in last year's blockbuster of the year, The Running Joke, help prepare for this role?
Oh my.
Yeah, good question.
So those characters are pretty much identical.
Yeah.
They're-
Like they both have very similar complexities and character arcs.
Yeah, both realistic roles.
Mhm.
Yeah, just the experience.
Okay.
Of, being in that professional film setting helped me.
Well, here's a question that I could ask. What's the difference in experience of being something that Laurel's directing versus in something that I'm directing? Don't answer that.
We want people to keep watching or listening to it, I guess.
Did you feel a lot of added pressure? I mean, obviously you practiced probably a lot more for A Doll's House than for The Running Joke, but did you feel a lot more pressure being like, oh, like if I mess up or I stump, like I only get one shot for that particular night, as opposed to, oh, well, we can cut and do another take, you know? Cause, or is it like, oh, I'm going to try this, and if it doesn't work, it's fine because we'll just do it again, as opposed to you have to do kind of all that in practice or in rehearsal, then it's a lot more polished for the actual performance.
Yes, that one. Yeah, actually, I felt more pressure during The Running Joke, maybe just because I was like, there's a camera here and there's not a live audience and this is weird and I don't know how to talk to a machine. But yeah, it was nice that I knew if I messed up, we could do a retake, whereas in A Doll's House, there were, I don't know, I can think of things that happened and I was like, well, I can't do that again. Guess we're just gonna go with it. But yeah, certainly there was a lot more rehearsal for A Doll's House, and
which is to say, there was rehearsal.
Yeah. And I just am comfortable on stage.
Yeah, I've experienced a similar thing as a musician, because in like a live performance, typically if you make a mistake, people forget about it, you know. If you give an overall good performance, then they'll forget what went wrong. But when you're recording something, if you do something wrong, it's
People
just
can watch it
there
again.
forever.
You can also feel too on film, like people are watching you do your craft versus people are watching the product of your craft.
Yeah.
So there's this added layer of scrutiny from the crew and all that who are trying to watch you get ready to perform. But on stage, you're presenting a polished final product.
I was going to ask this question. What kind of reactions did you get from people who saw it?
I got all kinds of reactions. There were the people who were like, this was my favorite show, I'm so glad you did this, and there's so much to think about, to people who were like, I didn't like that at all, and I was very uncomfortable, and somebody who told me they'd had bad dreams the night after they saw it.
Wow.
Which, yeah.
That's somehow a compliment.
Yeah, right.
You disturbed them
well,
so much,
then
their
it's working.
subconscious
Yeah.
won't shut up.
Yeah, well, that's kind of what I thought. I was like, oh, good, you were disturbed. You probably needed to be disturbed by that.
But what's disturbed? What were people uncomfortable with?
Generally, the people who came to me who were uncomfortable were older men who were married.
All right. Enough said.
Yeah.
I think there definitely is a kind of moral dilemma presented by the play, because Nora ends up leaving, right? And but she leaves her family and her children behind for kind of to find herself a little bit, right, and to step out on her own. And I think at least I found myself in this position of, well, if I were Nora, I don't think it's totally okay that she left her family, but I don't think the position she was in was good at all either. So you're kind of left wondering, okay, when do I stop being on Nora's side, and when do I, where do we draw the line here? And so I think that's one of the powerful things about the play is that, it lets people ask that question of how far are we going to take this thing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think what helped me as a director, and a director here specifically, think this is a good show to do here in this context, includes that Ibsen isn't saying, yes, she left and she should have left, good for her. That's not it, right? Mm-hmm. It's more complicated than that. It's painful and uncomfortable that she left, and it's not a great option. And it asks us to say, well, then what are her options? Is one choice better or worse? And what do we do about that, right? In a situation like her, there is no easy way out. There is no easy solution that allows things to be nice now.
I think it remarks on both Nora's sort of highest values as well as Ibsen's highest values, in terms of, are things like individual liberty and self-realization the most important things that there are? Because in circumstances like this, but really just in general, those things often come through very difficult circumstances and sometimes come with a cost, especially if you live in one kind of society and you realize you're different from that, but you can't leave necessarily. Those things can come at a cost, and I think that the question to be raised is it worth it?
Yeah, I think that's it. Like, it's going to cost. It's going to cost. Does that mean don't do it?
Yeah.
And I would say absolutely not.
Yeah.
It's going to cost, and we all need to pay in order for change to happen. And it's going to be uncomfortable and painful, but that's how growth happens, as we've established.
Oh, yeah. And I think that the fact that it was performed here, right, at Tabor Christian University or college, I guess.
Tabor University.
Whoa there. Not a university yet.
We built one new building and all high and mighty.
I think a very fair critique of especially Christianity in America is how long has these sorts of people or the traditions been anti-divorce but not pro-marriage, right? Because there's a profound difference between the two. Because I think a lot of what the culture of the past is that you don't air out your dirty laundry, right? If there's problems in the marriage, you don't really try to fix them. You just sweep them under the rug and don't get divorced, because that's, of course, the worst thing possible. But I think, avoiding something like avoiding a bad thing is much less different or much less similar than to pursue a good thing or to pursue goodness or wholeness in whatever it is that you're engaged in.
I think it's interesting to bring in the word divorce, because Nora's leaving Torvald, so that assumes the word divorce. Mm-hmm. But then it makes me think, like, were they really married? I mean, on paper they were, but as in the way that they were acting with each other, I don't feel like they really were married.
When was the play written? Because it takes place in the late 1800s. You said you bumped it up a little bit, but was it written during that time, or was it written more recently?
So it was written at the end of the 1800s.
Okay.
I know I'm going to be wrong, but I want to say 1890.
I'm looking it up.
We'll see what Zach says.
Okay.
For our production, we bumped it up to, I think we were thinking about like 1910, 1912, around there, because it permitted, one, for us to use electric light and also to have a gramophone instead of a piano on stage. The scene originally is written that Torvald plays the piano while she dances to the music, which is extreme. That's just such a potent image, right? It's almost a puppeteer and a puppet feeling to it. So that scene was adjusted, but we're also using we used Simon Stephens' translation, which is I believe was published in 2012. So we're looking at a British writer who wrote a translation that was first realized and kind of forged through a London National Theatre production. So I think the language is more economical now than Ibsen's original writing, and just generally more relatable.
Yeah, it premiered in 1879.
Okay, yeah, thanks.
But that was one of the questions that I was going to ask is how's it relevant? How's it relevant in a different way or the same way today as opposed to when it was written, and even in the context of this place where you put it on, because Tabor's Mennonite and, religion, not to I don't want to paint in broad strokes or anything, but there are religious subcultures that tend to be more patriarchal and more traditional than maybe the culture at large. So
I use this play in Intro to Theater class, and one of the first things that happens is it's immediately dismissed because this isn't an issue anymore, or at least that's the dominant perception in the room. Women used to be treated badly. Women used to lack agency or social currency, and now everything's fine. So that's usually the starting place with this play in a room full of college students, most of whom don't have a lot of exposure to theater or art in general. But so that's the beginning assumption. This play is not relevant because this is no longer an issue. Women can vote, so everything's great.
Everything's fine. We're all equal.
And I think, and then the next sort of reduction that happens that then allows them to dismiss it instead of engage with it is it's just about women's rights. So as a male student, I don't need to think about this.
That's the opposite of
the
true.
Next.
We
That's
know.
yeah. So, well, and then there's this layer too of being a female professor teaching this play that I'm hyper aware of than myself getting dismissed as that radical feminist professor, right? Yeah. And then not being heard anymore simply because they can write me off for that. So it's coming to a series of plateaus over the course of studying this play in class. And what we arrive at eventually, and sometimes this just comes through class discussion, which is always really, really dynamic with this play, and one of the reasons I really like teaching it in that class is that this can be extrapolated to include all forms of systemic oppression, and that our role, our job, our responsibility, especially if you want to call yourself a Christian, is to examine those systems and ask, who are they helping, who are they hurting, and then how do we help those who are hurting? And sometimes it's going to mean changing the system. I don't remember what we started at, but that's...
How is it relevant differently today is when it was written. Yeah, and I think... Oh, go ahead.
I would say, even if you do boil it down to the simplest, it's just a women's rights issue, it's still very relevant because, over the last couple months, we've had the whole Harvey Weinstein and company getting... accused, and people are coming forward to their sexual harassers. So it's still happening.
Right.
The guys just assume that they're in charge.
Yeah, and I think that's stuff like that is an important point because, like you said, women can vote, so it's fine. And like, legally speaking, yes, women are on a more equal ground now than they were, but there's more to the world than just the laws that our government makes. Mm-hmm. It's a cultural issue and, like I said, a subcultural issue as well.
It's also the little things. Like, there's this beautiful moment in the play, the mansplaining moment, where Torvald, Christine is there, and she has her knitting with her, and Torvald's like, you should do embroidery. Here, watch. This is how you do embroidery. And he's telling two women how to embroider who definitely know how to embroider, and is just wanting to be glorified as this smart, intelligent man who knows how to embroider, and let me explain it to you women. And, like, those little things happen all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In some ways, it's a more there's a potency to the patriarchy in its covertness, right? That it's almost harder to point to now than perhaps it was then, when there were these obvious, agreed upon, stark instances of it, and now it's we talk about microaggressions, right? We talk about these smaller but accumulated ways of burden that women carry because of these subtler and almost therefore more dangerous forms.
I think that makes it, stuff like this, even more important, because when it's harder to see.
Yeah, we need art to help point it out.
Yeah. So, yeah, and that makes it, I don't want to say even more relevant today, but maybe relevant in a different way. The first time I saw it, I was, as I was watching it, I was thinking, this seems feminist. But also, I'm relating to so much of this.
Well, I think it's safe to say we all enjoyed it very much.
Yes.
It was very well done. And, just the... and when you said this at the beginning, that you kind of picked the play as to, who you had available, right, for the parts. Mm-hmm. And I think that there was definitely... there wasn't, one person just kind of pulling everyone through, right? There was the great cast. Mm-hmm. And, it was just kind of an all-around great experience. I think it's like a 2-hour play. Flew by.
That's good.
Yeah. So maybe you'll enjoy this story. Hope so. But I kind of told Molly this story. Yeah. But so the play was kind of right before finals week, and I was like, oh, I have to go watch this play for the podcast, but also I have a ton of homework, so I'll go watch the first part and then leave so I can work on homework. And then the first intermission came, and we were I was with a couple friends, and they're like, are we gonna leave? And I was like, I'm into it, so I'll probably stay. And they're like, okay. And then after the second one, at the second intermission, my buddy turns to me and we look at each other and we're like, well, we can't leave now. And so we were planning to leave, and we were so drawn into it that we were like, well, I guess we'll just stay up later doing homework. So it was a late night. But yeah, so it was really good. I enjoyed it.
Good.
It's even better the second time.
Yeah.
Is it better the 100th time that you
yes,
do it?
Yes. I'm shocked at, and it's credit to Ibsen's writing and just the willingness of the cast to really delve deeply. That every time I watch it, they have my full attention, and every time I watch it, something is new to me, right? I hear something as if for the first time, and of course I've read it 100 times before, but it'll pop in a way that it hadn't, or you'll catch the double meaning in something that up till then, you hadn't noticed. And I think this is a play that especially for a contemporary audience, it's so dense, it can be really difficult to catch everything. And I highly recommend encountering it more than once.
Yeah.
Because there's so much more to unearth.
I thought when we were working on it in the spring, like, we uncovered so many double meanings. And I was like, wow, like, we really just dug into this play. And then we were working on it again in the fall, and there was one rehearsal where all of a sudden you went, oh my goodness, I just got that! And I was like, what? I discovered something else.
It's like a treasure hunt.
Right,
Do you have any really good examples? Like, any really good double meanings?
I don't
If I
remember
had my
one.
script, I have all these
All the
notes and highlighting, and I'm sure I could find something, but I don't know.
While she's looking too,
Oh, I just thought of one.
okay.
Sorry.
No,
Okay.
go ahead.
In Act 3, when Dr. Rank leaves and Nora knows that she's never going to see him again because he's going to die of his illness, he says, thank you, Helmers. And then he looks at Nora and he says, thank you for the cigar. And he looks at Nora and then he says, and for the light. Because Nora had lit his cigar, but also, like, she was his light. She was what, brought life to him. So that was one.
Mm-hmm. And in that same scene, when he says goodbye instead of good night, or wish me, what does he say? Wish me a good night's sleep or something like that.
And then Nora says that.
And then you say, wish me the same.
No, Nora says, sleep well, Dr. Rank.
Ah.
And he says, thank you for that. And then she says, wish me the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And at that moment, I hear Rank talking about sleep in terms of death, but then I hear Nora doing the same.
Mm-hmm.
And basically in a veiled way,
referencing
her anticipated suicide.
Mm-hmm.
So just some,
Yeah, just some light stuff.
Casual, light double meanings.
Daniel, since you brought back up how we choose, why this play, and a question we're always asking is why this play for this audience at this time. Mm-hmm. And we chose the play. I mean, I've always wanted to work on this text. I'd seen productions of it. I'd read it several times. And so it was exciting to me to work on a play that I felt like I really knew in a deeper way than most. But it also felt terribly relevant and has only increased since having selected and presented it with the presidential race and election process, and now this sort of new era that we're living in. Its relevance is even more heightened, I think. And then the Women's March, and then now all of the sexual abuse allegations that are emerging. It just keeps it's like we're pulling off that mask. It's like as a society, we're finally trying to grab this snake by the tail and really sort of try to wrestle this thing. And I hope that how intensely relevant the play feels is an indicator of good things to come.
I think that's how you know it's really a great work, when it's continually becoming newly relevant.
Mm-hmm. And then also that as a society we're failing
Yeah.
Well, good and bad things.
That's why he wrote it.
Yeah. But yes, his understanding of humans at their core is really astounding.
All right, well, I think there's only one thing left to do.
Oh man, I'm nervous now because I haven't done the announcer voice in a while. So you know what it's time for? The joke of the week!
All right, so the guests get to do the joke of the week. Who's bringing the joke?
Okay. I'll go.
Okay.
Shoot. I'm gonna mess this up. Okay. Have you guys heard about the insomniac, agnostic, dyslexic man? He lies awake at night wondering if there really is a dog.
I like it. This has been the joke of the week.
All right, that does it for part 1. Be sure to check out part 2 to find the rest of our discussion on A Doll's House. If you want to follow us on social media, you can find us on Twitter at DogInTheWoods15, on Facebook and Instagram at The Dog in the Woods, and you can find everything we do on our website, thedoginthewoods.com.